Elsie Holloway was standing in the middle of her orchard when the past rode back into Black Valley on a dust-covered horse. And she knew before he even dismounted that everything she had built was about to come apart. 3 years since she had last seen Gideon Crawford. 3 years since he had left her standing at the altar with a borrowed dress and a broken promise. And now he was here, walking toward her through the rows of young apple trees she had planted with her own hands, his weathered tan coat dark with trail dust, his face harder and leaner than she remembered. She did not move. She would not give him that. He stopped 6 feet away, close enough that she could see the scar along his jaw she did not recognize, the lines around his eyes that had not been there before the war, close enough that she could see him take in the orchard, the irrigation ditches she had dug herself, the small, neat rows that represented every hour of daylight she had worked for the last 3 years. He took off his hat. "Gideon, I need to talk to you about the water rights." Her chest went tight. She had known this was coming. The railroad had been buying up land along the valley for months, pushing out the smaller homesteads, forcing people to sell or watch their wells run dry. But she had thought she was safe. She had thought Whisper Ranch was too far from the main line, too small to matter. "What about the water rights?" she said, and her voice came out steady, even though her hands wanted to shake. Gideon looked at her for a long moment, and something shifted in his expression. Something that might have been regret, or guilt, or just exhaustion. "The government surveyed the valley last winter. The spring that feeds your orchard, it is on federal land. They are issuing a new deed. I bought it." The world tilted. Elsie heard herself breathe in, then out. She heard a hawk cry somewhere overhead. She heard the wind move through the apple leaves behind her. "You bought it." "Yes." "So you own my water." "Yes." She wanted to scream. She wanted to hit him. She wanted to ask why, after everything, he would come back just to destroy the one thing she had managed to salvage from the wreckage he had left behind. But she did none of those things. Instead, she turned and looked at the orchard, at the trees she had chosen and planted and watered through 2 brutal summers. And she made herself think. The freeze was coming. Everyone in the valley could feel it. Another 6 weeks, maybe less, and the first hard frost would hit. If she lost the water now, the trees would not survive the winter. If the trees died, the ranch was worthless. If the ranch was worthless, she had nothing. No home, no income, no way to pay off the debt she had taken on to keep the land after her father died. She turned back to Gideon. "What do you want?" He met her eyes, and for the first time since he had ridden up, she saw something raw in his face. "To help you keep it." That stopped her cold. She stared at him, trying to read the truth in a face she had once known better than her own. "Why?" "Because I owe you that much." "You owe me a lot more than that," she said, and the bitterness came through sharp and clear. Gideon flinched. "I know. Then why now? Why come back after 3 years and buy the one thing I need to survive? Why not just leave me alone?" He looked away, jaw tight, and when he spoke his voice was rough. "Because the railroad is coming for this land, Elsie. They have been buying up every spring, every creek, every water source in the valley. If I had not bought the deed, they would have. And they would have shut off your water the same day." She wanted to believe him. That was the worst part. Even after everything, even knowing what he had done, some part of her still wanted to believe that Gideon Crawford had come back to Black Valley to save her instead of ruin her. But belief was a luxury she could not afford. "So you bought it to protect me," she said flatly. "I bought it to give you a chance." "A chance to what?" "Beg you for water. Sign my ranch over to you. Trust you again." His eyes snapped back to hers, and the intensity there made her breath catch. A chance to fight back. The railroad wants this valley, but they do not have it yet. If we can hold them off until spring, if we can prove the orchard is profitable, we can force them to negotiate. But you cannot do that without water. And I cannot do it without your land. Elsie shook her head slowly. "You want me to partner with you. I want us to survive." There it was. The word that had always been Gideon's weapon. Us. As if they were still two people who belonged in the same sentence. As if he had not walked away from her 3 years ago with nothing but a letter that said he could not be the man she needed. She stepped back, putting distance between them. "I do not need your help." "Yes, you do. The railroad offered to buy Whisper Ranch last month. You turned them down. That means they will start looking for other ways to force you out. They will cut off your access to the main road. They will buy up the land around you until you are landlocked. They will make it impossible for you to sell your crop, even if you manage to grow it. You think you can fight that alone?" Elsie felt the anger rise hot and sharp in her chest. "I have been alone for 3 years, Gideon. I have been fighting alone since the day you left. I do not need you to tell me what I can and cannot do. I am not trying to tell you anything. I am trying to give you a way out. By making me dependent on you. By putting me in a position where I have no choice but to trust you. You think I am going to do that?" He took a step toward her, and she saw something fierce flash across his face. "I think you are smart enough to know when you are out of options. I think you are stubborn enough to hate me and work with me at the same time. And I think you know that if you lose this ranch, you lose everything." She hated that he was right. She hated that she had lain awake the last 3 nights, trying to figure out how to keep the orchard alive through the winter, how to pay off the debt her father had left, how to stop the railroad from swallowing her whole. She hated that Gideon Crawford, of all people, was standing in front of her, offering the one thing she could not get anywhere else. But most of all, she hated that part of her wanted to say yes. "What are you asking for?" she said quietly. Gideon held her gaze. "Let me run the water line from the spring to your orchard. Let me help you get the crop in before the freeze. Let me stand with you when the railroad comes back. And when this is over, when the land is secure, I will sign the water rights over to you. Free and clear. Why? Because I owe you. That is not an answer." His jaw tightened. "Because I made a mistake 3 years ago, and I have been trying to outrun it ever since. Because I came back from the war, and I did not know how to be the man you needed. Because I was a coward, and I hurt you, and I cannot undo that. But I can do this. I can help you keep what is yours." Elsie looked at him, at the man who had once been everything to her, and she felt the old wound tear open again, raw and bleeding. "You think this makes up for it? You think helping me keep my ranch erases what you did? No. But it is a start." She wanted to tell him no. She wanted to send him away and figure this out on her own, the way she had figured out everything else. But the truth was cold and sharp in her chest. She did not have time. She did not have money. She did not have options. And the freeze was coming. "1 month," she said. "You help me get the orchard ready for winter. You help me negotiate with the railroad. And then you leave. You sign over the water rights, and you get out of Black Valley, and you do not come back. Something flickered in his eyes, something that looked like pain. But he nodded. 1 month. They shook on it. His hand was rough and warm, and for one brief second, Elsie let herself remember what it had felt like to hold that hand and believe it would never let go. Then she pulled away and turned toward the house. The work started the next morning. Gideon showed up at dawn with a wagon full of lumber, pipe, and tools, and Elsie met him at the barn with a list of everything that needed to be done before the first frost. They did not talk beyond what was necessary. She told him where to dig. He told her what supplies he needed. They moved around each other like strangers, careful and cold. But the work itself was honest. Gideon knew how to build. He knew how to read land, how to see where water wanted to go, and how to coax it along. By midday, they had the main line laid from the spring to the edge of the orchard, and by evening, they were digging the lateral trenches that would carry water to each row. Elsie worked beside him, hauling pipe, packing dirt, checking levels. Her hands blistered, her back ached. But she did not stop. She could not afford to. When the sun finally dropped below the hills and the light turned copper and gold, Gideon straightened and looked at what they had done. "It is a good start," he said quietly. Elsie wiped the dirt from her hands and nodded. "Tomorrow we need to reinforce the main gate. The railroad sent a surveyor through last week. I caught him marking fence lines on my land." Gideon's face went hard. "They are testing you, seeing how much they can push before you push back." I pushed back. I ran him off with a rifle. A faint smile ghosted across Gideon's mouth. "I bet you did." She did not smile back. "They will come again." "I know." That night, Elsie lay in bed and stared at the ceiling, listening to the wind rattle the shutters, and she tried not to think about the man sleeping in the barn loft 20 yards away. She tried not to think about the way he had looked at her when he said he owed her. She tried not to think about the fact that for the first time in 3 years, she was not alone. But the truth was, she did not know if that made things better or worse. The next morning, the railroad came back. 3 men on horseback, well-dressed, clean-shaven, with the kind of smiles that did not reach their eyes. The lead man introduced himself as Mr. Dawson, assistant to the regional land acquisition director, and he offered Elsie a price for Whisper Ranch that was half what the land was worth. She told him no. Dawson's smile thinned. "Miss Holloway, you are making this harder than it needs to be. The railroad is coming through this valley whether you sell or not. You can take a fair price now, or you can wait until your land is worthless and take nothing." Elsie crossed her arms. "My land is not for sale." Dawson glanced past her toward the orchard, where Gideon was working on the gate. "And who is that?" "Someone helping me with the water line." Dawson's eyes narrowed. "You brought in a hired hand. That is interesting. Because we heard you were having trouble keeping this place running on your own. I am running it just fine." "Are you?" Dawson leaned forward in his saddle. "Because from where I stand, Miss Holloway, it looks like you are one bad season away from losing everything. And winter is coming." Gideon appeared beside her so suddenly that Elsie almost jumped. He did not say anything. He just stood there, solid and still, the hammer in his hand, making it very clear that he was not going to let Dawson or anyone else push past the gate. Dawson looked at Gideon, then back at Elsie. "You should think carefully about who you trust, Miss Holloway. Men like that They drift. They do not stay. And when he leaves, you will still be here. Alone. He tipped his hat and turned his horse, and the three men rode back toward town, leaving nothing but dust and the cold certainty that this was only the beginning. Elsie waited until they were out of sight before she let herself breathe. That was a threat. Gideon set the hammer down. Yes, they are going to come after me harder now. Yes. She looked at him. You did not have to step in like that. Yes, I did. There was something in his voice, something final and unmovable. And Elsie felt a crack open in the wall she had built around herself. She turned away before he could see it. The work continued. They reinforced the gate, patched the barn roof, cleared the irrigation ditches. The days blurred together, long and exhausting, and slowly Elsie began to see the shape of what they were building. Not just a water line, not just a defense against the railroad, but something solid, something that could last. And that terrified her. Because every time Gideon handed her a tool, every time he steadied a post while she hammered, every time he looked at her and she saw the man he had been before the war broke him, she felt herself softening. She felt the anger that had kept her upright for 3 years start to crack and shift. And underneath it was something far more dangerous. Hope. 1 week into the work, a storm rolled through the valley. It came fast and hard. The kind of storm that turned the sky black and sent the horses into the barn and made the whole world feel small and breakable. Elsie and Gideon barely made it to the house before the rain hit. And then they were standing in the kitchen, soaked through, water dripping from their hair and clothes, and the silence between them was suddenly too loud to ignore. Gideon pulled off his coat and hung it by the door. You should get dry. Elsie did not move. Why did you really come back? He went still. I told you. No. You told me you bought the water rights. You told me you owe me. But that is not why you came back to Black Valley. You could have sent someone else. You could have handled this from a distance. So why are you here? Gideon looked at her, and for the first time since he had ridden back into her life, she saw him without the walls. Because I could not stay away anymore, he said quietly. Because I have spent 3 years trying to forget you, and I cannot. Because every time I close my eyes, I see you standing in that church. And I know I am the reason you stopped believing in anything good. Elsie's throat tightened. You do not get to do this. You do not get to come back and say things like that and expect me to forgive you. I am not asking you to forgive me. I am asking you to let me prove I am not the same man who left. You are exactly the same man, she said, and her voice broke. You are still running. You are still keeping secrets. You think I have not noticed that you will not talk about the war. You think I have not seen the way you wake up at night. You are still the man who cannot stay. Gideon flinched, and the pain in his face was so raw that Elsie almost reached for him. Almost. But she held herself still, because she had learned the hard way that reaching for Gideon Crawford only left her holding air. You are right, he said finally. I am still running. But I am trying to stop. And I thought, maybe if I came back here, if I did this one thing right, maybe I could figure out how. The rain hammered against the roof. Thunder rolled across the valley. And Elsie stood there, soaked and shaking, and felt the last of her defenses start to crumble. What happened to you? She said softly. What happened in the war that you cannot tell me? Gideon closed his eyes. I saw men die, Elsie. Good men. Men who had families waiting for them. And I lived. I do not know why. I do not know what I did to deserve that. And when I came home, when I saw you waiting for me, I realized I was not the man you thought I was. I was broken, and I did not want to break you too. So you left. So I left. Elsie felt the tears burn hot behind her eyes, but she did not let them fall. You broke me anyway. I know, he said, and his voice was raw. I know. They stood there in the dim storm light, and the distance between them felt like a canyon and a breath at the same time. Elsie wanted to cross it. She wanted to close the space and let herself feel again. But she was so tired of wanting things she could not keep. The storm passed. The work continued. But something had shifted. They were careful with each other now. Too careful. And the silence between them was no longer cold. It was charged. Fragile. Full of all the things they were not saying. 2 weeks into the month, a man rode into Black Valley and asked for Elsie by name. His name was Thomas Garrett, and he had been Gideon's captain during the war. He was older, graying, with a limp and a hard face. And when Elsie saw the way Gideon went rigid at the sight of him, she knew this was not a friendly visit. Garrett dismounted slowly, favoring his left leg. "Crawford," he said. "I heard you were back." Gideon did not move. "What do you want, Thomas?" Garrett's eyes shifted to Elsie, then back to Gideon. "I want to talk." "Private." "No," Elsie said, stepping forward. "Whatever you have to say, you can say it in front of me." Garrett smiled, and it was not kind. "You sure about that, Miss Holloway?" "Yes." "All right then." Garrett reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper. "This is a promissory note. Signed by your father 4 years ago. He borrowed $2,000 from a lender in Denver to keep this ranch running. The note was sold to me 6 months ago. It is due in full by the end of the month." Elsie's stomach dropped. "That is not possible. My father never borrowed money." Garrett handed her the paper. "The signature says otherwise." She unfolded it with shaking hands. The handwriting was her father's. The date was clear. And the amount was enough to take the ranch even if she sold everything she owned. "Why now?" Gideon said, his voice low and dangerous. "Why bring this to her now?" Garrett shrugged. "Because I can. And because the railroad is willing to pay me double what the note is worth if I help them clear this land. So here's the deal, Miss Holloway. You sell to the railroad, and I forgive the debt. You do not sell, and I take everything you own to settle it." Elsie could not breathe. She could not think. The paper in her hands felt like a death sentence. "Get out," Gideon said quietly. Garrett looked at him. "You do not get to make that call, Crawford." I said get out. There was something in Gideon's voice that made Garrett take a step back. He held up his hands. "You have until the end of the month. After that, the debt goes to collection. And trust me, Miss Holloway, you do not want that." He limped back to his horse and rode away, leaving Elsie standing in the yard with a piece of paper that destroyed everything. Gideon turned to her. "Elsie." She looked up at him, and the world felt like it was tilting. "You knew. You knew about this debt." "No. I swear to you, I did not know. But you knew Thomas Garrett. You knew he was in the valley. I knew he was buying up land for the railroad. I did not know he had your father's note." Elsie shook her head, trying to hold herself together. $2,000. I do not have $2,000. I do not have half that. Even if I sold the crop, even if I sold every tree in the orchard, I could not cover it. We will figure it out. How? How are we going to figure this out, Gideon? The railroad owns the debt. They own the water. They own everything around me. And in 2 weeks they are going to take this ranch, and there is nothing I can do to stop them. Her voice broke on the last word, and suddenly Gideon was there, his hands on her shoulders, steady and solid. Listen to me. We are not done yet. There is still time. We can fight this. With what? I have nothing left to fight with. You have me. Elsie looked up at him, and the tears she had been holding back finally spilled over. I do not want you, she said. And they both knew it was a lie. I do not want your help. I do not want your guilt. I just want my life back. Gideon's hands tightened on her shoulders. Then let me give it to you. Let me do this one thing right. She wanted to believe him. But belief felt like the cruelest trap of all. That night, Elsie could not sleep. She lay in bed and stared at the ceiling and tried to see a way out. But every path led to the same place. Loss. Ruin. The end of everything she had built. Just after midnight, she heard footsteps outside. She got up, pulled on her coat, and stepped onto the porch. Gideon was standing by the barn, looking out at the orchard, and the moonlight made him look like a ghost. She walked over to him. You should be asleep. So should you. They stood there in the cold, and the silence stretched long and quiet. Finally, Gideon spoke. I can cover the debt. Elsie's heart lurched. What? I have money. Not a lot, but enough. I can pay off Garrett and keep the ranch out of collection. She turned to stare at him. Why would you do that? Because I told you I would help you keep what is yours. That is not help, Gideon. That is charity. That is you saving me because you feel guilty. Maybe it is. But it is also the only option you have. Elsie shook her head. I am not taking your money. I am not going to owe you my land, and my water, and my livelihood. You would not owe me anything. I would give it to you free and clear. Nothing is free, she said bitterly. You taught me that. Gideon flinched, and the pain in his face was so raw that Elsie felt her own heart twist. I know you do not trust me. I know I have done nothing to earn it. But I am asking you to let me do this. Not because I feel guilty. Not because I owe you. But because I care about you, Elsie. I never stopped caring about you. The words hung in the cold air between them, and Elsie felt everything inside her crack wide open. She wanted to be angry. She wanted to push him away and tell him it was too late. But the truth was, she was tired. Tired of being alone. Tired of fighting. Tired of pretending she did not still feel something for the man standing in front of her. If I let you do this, she said quietly, what happens after? What happens when the debt is paid, and the water is running, and the railroad moves on? Do you stay? Or do you leave again? Gideon looked at her, and for a long moment he did not answer. Then he said, I do not know. I want to stay, but I do not know if I can. At least you are honest. He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the heat of him in the cold. "I am trying, Elsie. I am trying to be the man you deserve. But I do not know if I will ever get there." Elsie closed her eyes. "Then why are you still here?" "Because I cannot leave you again. Even if I am not strong enough to stay, I cannot walk away while you need me." She opened her eyes and looked at him, and the truth was stark and painful. "I do need you. I hate that I need you. But I do." Gideon reached up and touched her face, his hand rough and warm against her skin. "Then let me help. Let me do this. And when it is over, if you want me gone, I will go. I promise." Elsie felt the tears come again, and this time she did not stop them. "All right," she whispered. "All right." The next morning, Gideon rode into town and paid off Thomas Garrett in full. He came back with a signed release and the original promissory note, and when he handed it to Elsie, she stared at it for a long time before she folded it and put it in the kitchen drawer where her father used to keep important papers. "Thank you," she said. Gideon nodded. "Now we focus on the railroad." But the railroad was not done. 3 days later, a fire broke out in the hay barn. It was small, contained, and Elsie and Gideon put it out before it spread. But the message was clear. The railroad was escalating. "They are trying to scare you into selling," Gideon said, standing in the charred wreckage of the barn door. "They think if they make it hard enough, you will give up." Elsie looked at the blackened wood, the smell of smoke still thick in the air. "I am not giving up. I know, but we need to be ready for whatever comes next." Gideon nodded. "We will be." The next week passed in a blur of work and waiting. They finished the water line, reinforced the fences, shored up the barn. The orchard was as ready for winter as it was going to be. But the tension in the valley kept building, and everyone in Black Valley knew that something was about to break. It broke on a Thursday night. Elsie woke to the sound of horses and shouting, and when she ran to the window, she saw flames. The barn was on fire. Not the hay barn this time. The main barn. The one with the tools, the feed, the winter stores. She grabbed her coat and ran outside, and Gideon was already there, hauling buckets from the well, his face grim and determined. Elsie grabbed a bucket and ran toward the barn, and the heat hit her like a wall. "Get back!" Gideon shouted. "There are horses inside." "Elsie, get back." But she was already moving. She pulled her shawl over her mouth and ran through the smoke into the barn, and the world turned into heat and noise and choking darkness. She found the first horse and cut the rope, then the second, and she was turning toward the third when she heard the beam crack above her. She looked up, just in time to see it fall. Then Gideon was there, slamming into her, shoving her sideways, and the beam came down right where she had been standing. They hit the ground hard, and Gideon covered her with his body as the fire roared around them. "Move," he said, his voice rough and urgent. "Move now." They crawled toward the door, low and fast, and the smoke burned in Elsie's lungs. She could feel the heat blistering her skin, could hear the barn groaning as the fire ate through the supports. Gideon grabbed her hand and pulled, and they stumbled out into the cold night air, just as the roof caved in behind them. They collapsed on the ground, coughing and gasping, and Elsie felt Gideon's hand still wrapped around hers, solid and unshakable. "Are you hurt?" he said, his voice raw. She shook her head, still trying to breathe. Gideon pulled her up and away from the burning barn, and they stood there, watching it burn, the flames lighting up the night sky. And Elsie felt something inside her finally break wide open. "You saved my life," she said. Gideon looked at her, his face streaked with soot and sweat. "I told you, I am not leaving you." And in that moment, standing in the firelight with the barn collapsing behind them, Elsie believed him. The barn burned through the night. By morning there was nothing left but ash and blackened timbers. Elsie stood in the ruins and felt the weight of it settle on her shoulders. The tools were gone. The feed was gone. The winter stores were gone. And the railroad had made it very clear that they were not going to stop. Gideon found her standing there at dawn. "We rebuild," he said quietly. Elsie shook her head. "With what?" "I do not have the money to replace what we lost. I do not have the time." "Then we find another way." "There is no other way, Gideon. They won. The railroad won." He turned her to face him, his hands on her shoulders. "No, they have not won. Not yet. What do you want me to do? What is left to fight with?" Gideon's jaw tightened. "We go to the land office. We file a formal complaint against the railroad for arson and intimidation. We force them to answer for what they have done. And we make enough noise that the territorial governor has to pay attention. That will take weeks, maybe months. And I do not have weeks. Then we do it in days. We ride to the Capitol. We go straight to the governor's office. We make them listen." Elsie stared at him. "You think the governor is going to care about one burned barn in Black Valley? I think the governor is going to care about a railroad company that is burning out settlers to steal their land. And I think if we get there first, if we tell the story before the railroad can spin it, we have a chance." It was insane. It was desperate. But it was also the only plan they had. "All right," Elsie said. "We ride today." They left that afternoon. It was a 2-day ride to the territorial capital, hard and fast, and they pushed the horses as far as they dared. They camped the first night in the open, and Gideon built a small fire, while Elsie tried not to think about everything they had left behind. "Do you really think this will work?" she said quietly. Gideon poked at the fire. "I think we have to try. And if it does not, then we figure out what comes next." Elsie pulled her coat tighter around herself. "I am tired, Gideon. I am tired of fighting. I am tired of losing." He looked at her across the fire. "You have not lost yet. I feel like I have been losing for 3 years." Gideon was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I am sorry. I am sorry I was not there. I am sorry I left you to fight alone." Elsie felt the tears burn again, but she was too tired to cry. "Why did you really come back, Gideon? And do not tell me it was about the water rights. Tell me the truth." He met her eyes, and the firelight made the planes of his face look sharp and shadowed. "Because I was afraid you would disappear. I heard the railroad was moving into the valley, and I knew you would fight them, and I was afraid that one day I would hear that you were gone, that you had lost the ranch, that you had left Black Valley, that I would never see you again, and I could not live with that." Elsie's breath caught. "So you came back for me." "I came back because I could not stay away." "That is not the same thing." "Yes, it is." She looked at him, and the space between them felt impossibly small and impossibly wide at the same time. "I do not know how to trust you again. I know. I do not know if I can." I know that too. Then what are we doing, Gideon? What is this? He leaned forward, his eyes locked on hers. This is me trying to prove that I am not the man who left you. This is me trying to be the man who stays. Elsie felt something break inside her. Something that had been holding her together for 3 years. And suddenly, she was moving around the fire. And then, she was in his arms. And Gideon was holding her like she was the only solid thing in the world. They held each other in the firelight, and neither of them spoke. There were no promises, no declarations. Just two people who had been broken and lost, trying to find their way back to something that felt like home. They reached the capital the next afternoon. The governor's office was in a stone building at the center of town, and Elsie felt every eye on her as they walked through the doors. She was dusty, smoke-stained, exhausted, and she knew she looked like exactly what she was. A woman fighting for her life. The clerk at the desk tried to turn them away. The governor is not seeing visitors today. Gideon leaned on the desk. Then you tell the governor that a woman just rode 2 days to report arson and land theft by the Rocky Mountain Railroad. And if he does not see her now, she is going to stand on the steps and tell every person in this town exactly what is happening in Black Valley. The clerk stared at him. Then he disappeared into the back office. 5 minutes later, they were sitting across from Governor Harrison, a gray-haired man with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense expression. Elsie told him everything. The debt, the water rights, the fire, the intimidation. And when she was done, Harrison leaned back in his chair and looked at her for a long moment. You have proof of this arson. Gideon pulled out a signed statement from the town marshal in Black Valley. He had ridden out the morning after the fire and documented the scene. It was not much, but it was something. Harrison read it, then set it down. The railroad has a lot of power, Miss Holloway. They have money. They have lawyers. They have connections all the way to Washington. You understand what you are up against. Elsie lifted her chin. I understand that they burned my barn and tried to run me off my land. And I understand that if you do not stop them, they will do it to someone else. Harrison studied her. Then he looked at Gideon. And you are Gideon Crawford. I served under Captain Thomas Garrett during the war. He is the man who bought Miss Holloway's debt and sold it to the railroad. Harrison's expression sharpened. Garrett. I know that name. He has been buying up land all over the territory. For the railroad, Gideon said. They use him to pressure settlers into selling. If you look into his records, I think you will find a pattern. Harrison nodded slowly. I will look into it. But I cannot promise you anything. The railroad has a legal right to acquire land. If they can prove they acted within the law, there is nothing I can do. They burned my barn, Elsie said quietly. That is not within the law. No, Harrison agreed. It is not. Give me 2 weeks. I will investigate. And if I find evidence of wrongdoing, I will bring charges. But you need to be prepared for the possibility that the railroad will fight back. Hard. Elsie met his eyes. I have been fighting hard for 3 years, Governor. I am not stopping now. They left the capital that afternoon and rode back to Black Valley. The trip back felt longer, heavier, and Elsie could not shake the feeling that they had put everything on the table and now all they could do was wait. But when they arrived back at Whisper Ranch, something had changed. The town marshal was waiting for them with news. 3 more ranches in the valley had reported fires in the last 2 days. The railroad was escalating, and people were starting to talk. They are scared, the marshal said. But they are also angry. And if you are willing to stand up to the railroad, Miss Holloway, I think you will find you are not alone. That night, Elsie stood on her porch and looked out at the orchard. The trees were bare now, waiting for winter, but they were alive. They had survived, and so had she. Gideon came to stand beside her. "What are you thinking?" She smiled faintly. "I am thinking we might actually have a chance." He looked at her, and the softness in his expression made her heart ache. "We do, as long as we stand together." Elsie turned to face him. "I need to know something. When this is over, when the railroad is gone and the land is secure, are you going to leave?" Gideon was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I do not want to leave, but I do not know if I am strong enough to stay. I do not know if I can be the man you need." "Then let me decide that," Elsie said quietly. "Let me decide if you are enough." He looked at her, and the raw hope in his face was almost too much to bear. "You think I am enough. I think you came back. I think you fought for me. I think you stood beside me when no one else would. And I think that is enough." Gideon reached for her, slow and careful, and when she did not pull away, he cupped her face in his hands. "I love you, Elsie. I never stopped loving you. And if you give me a chance, I will spend the rest of my life proving that I can stay." Elsie felt the tears spill over, but this time they were not tears of grief. They were something else. Something bright and fragile and terrifyingly hopeful. "I love you too," she whispered. "I hate that I love you, but I do." Gideon kissed her then, soft and fierce and full of all the years they had lost, and Elsie kissed him back and felt the last of her walls come down. The railroad's response came 3 days later. They sent a lawyer with an offer. Drop the complaint, sell the land, and walk away with enough money to start over somewhere else. Refuse, and they would tie her up in court for years. Elsie told the lawyer no. The town rallied. 6 ranchers signed a joint complaint. The territorial governor sent an investigator. And Thomas Garrett, facing charges of fraud and extortion, quietly left the territory. The railroad pulled back, not because they had given up, but because the fight had become too public, too expensive, and too politically dangerous. They moved their operation south, and Black Valley went quiet. By the time the first snow fell, the water line was running, the barn was halfway rebuilt, and Whisper Ranch was still standing. Elsie stood in the orchard on a cold December morning and watched the frost settle on the branches, and she felt something she had not felt in 3 years. Peace. Gideon came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her, and she leaned back into him, solid and warm and finally here. "You did it," he said quietly. "We did it," she corrected. He kissed the top of her head. "So what now?" Elsie smiled. "Now we see if these trees survive the winter. Now we plant more in the spring. Now we build the life we should have had 3 years ago." Gideon turned her to face him. "And if I mess it up again? If I cannot be what you need, then we figure it out together," Elsie said. "Because I am not giving up on you, Gideon Crawford. Not again." He kissed her then, slow and deep, and when they pulled apart, he said, "Marry me." Elsie's breath caught. "What? Marry me? I know I do not deserve a second chance. I know I have a long way to go to earn back your trust. But I am asking anyway. Marry me, Elsie. Let me spend the rest of my life proving I can stay." Elsie looked at him, at the man who had broken her, and come back, and fought beside her, and finally learned how to stay. And she said, yes. The wedding was small, just the town marshal, a few neighbors, and the winter sky overhead. Elsie wore her mother's dress, and Gideon wore a clean shirt and vest. And when they said their vows in the little church at the edge of Black Valley, Elsie felt like she was finally stepping into the life she was meant to live. They spent the winter rebuilding. The barn went up beam by beam. The orchard waited, patient and still. And every night, Gideon came home, and every morning he was still there. And slowly Elsie learned to believe that this time, he was not going anywhere. By the time spring came, the orchard was in bloom. White and pink blossoms covered the branches, and the air smelled like hope and new beginnings. Elsie stood in the middle of it all and looked at what they had built. And she felt Gideon's hand slip into hers. "We made it," she said. "Yes," he said. "We did." And for the first time in a long time, Elsie believed in forever. The years that followed were not easy. There were hard winters and dry summers and seasons when the crop failed, and they had to start over. But they did it together. Gideon learned to stop running, and Elsie learned to trust again. And slowly, carefully, they built a life that felt solid and real. They had children. 2 daughters with their mother's eyes and their father's stubbornness. They expanded the orchard. They built a new barn, bigger and stronger than the one that had burned. And every year when the apples came in, Elsie stood in the middle of Whisper Ranch and remembered the years she almost lost everything, and the man who came back to help her save it. One evening, years later, they sat on the porch and watched the sun set over the valley. The orchard stretched out before them, green and thriving, and Gideon reached for her hand. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Giving me a second chance." Elsie looked at him, at the man who had learned how to stay, and she smiled. "No, not for a single day." "Good," he said, "because I plan on spending the rest of my life making sure you never do." And he kept that promise every single day.